Welcome to Lesson 3 of Week 9. Many grants span multiple years, requiring thoughtful forecasting of how costs will change over the project life cycle. A 3-year or 5-year budget is not simply year one repeated. Costs evolve as projects move through different phases. Multi-year forecasting requires thinking strategically about your project timeline. When will major purchases occur? How will staffing ramp up and potentially taper? What activities happen early in the project versus later? Your budget should reflect this reality rather than presenting arbitrary identical amounts each year. This lesson will help you understand common patterns in multi-year budgets, how to match budget timing to project activities, techniques for projecting costs across years, and how to present multi-year budgets compellingly to reviewers. Strong multi-year budgets demonstrate that you have thought carefully about implementation and understand how resource needs will evolve. Weak budgets with identical amounts each year suggest lack of planning or arbitrary allocation that does not reflect project reality. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to develop multi-year budgets that align with your project plans and demonstrate thoughtful forecasting to reviewers. Multi-year budgeting matters because projects evolve over time. A research project has different needs in its setup phase than during data collection than during analysis and dissemination. A program implementation has startup costs that differ from ongoing operational costs. Your budget should reflect this evolution. Realistic planning requires budgets that match the actual timing of activities. If you will purchase major equipment in year one, budget it in year one. If travel for dissemination happens in year 3, budget that travel in year 3. Arbitrarily spreading costs evenly across years ignores how projects actually unfold. Thoughtful forecasting demonstrates competence to reviewers. When your budget reflects understanding of the project life cycle, reviewers gain confidence in your ability to manage the work. When your budget shows identical amounts each year regardless of project phases, reviewers may question whether you have thought through implementation carefully. Implementation success depends on accurate budgets. If you budget major purchases in year 3 but actually need them in year 1, you face problems. If you budget heavy staffing in year 1 but do not hire until year 2, funds sit unused, while year 2 becomes underfunded. Matching budget to reality prevents these resource gaps and timing mismatches. Front-loaded budgets have higher costs in early project years that decline in later years. This pattern is common and appropriate for many types of projects. Several factors drive front-loading. Equipment purchases often occur at project start. You buy the microscope, the servers, the specialized instruments in year 1, then use them throughout the project without recurring purchase costs. Infrastructure development, curriculum creation, technology platform building, these one-time investments happen early. Hiring costs include recruitment, onboarding, and training expenses that do not recur annually. Specific examples include laboratory setup for a research project, where year 1 includes extensive equipment purchases and lab modifications. Technology projects may require major platform development in year 1, followed by maintenance and enhancement in later years. Training programs may develop curriculum and materials in year 1, then deliver programming at lower cost in subsequent years. When presenting front-loaded budgets, explain why early investment enables later efficiency. Reviewers should understand that higher year 1 costs reflect necessary startup investments that create capacity for ongoing work at lower cost. Without this explanation, reviewers might question whether you padded early years or do not understand your project's cost structure. Steady-state budgets show relatively consistent costs across project years. This pattern fits projects with ongoing operations that remain stable throughout the performance period. Stable operations with consistent staffing levels and recurring activities produce steady-state budgets. A service delivery program serving a consistent number of participants each year, a longitudinal study collecting similar data annually, an ongoing training program with regular cohorts, these projects may have similar costs year over year. Examples include direct service programs where staffing and participant numbers remain constant, research studies with consistent annual data collection activities, and training initiatives delivering the same curriculum to successive cohorts. These projects may have modest startup variations but generally consistent operational costs. Even steady-state budgets should account for inflation and cost increases. Salaries typically increase annually. Supplies and travel costs rise with general inflation. A truly flat budget that ignores these increases will be underfunded in later years. Build in appropriate escalation even when activity levels remain constant. The next lesson focuses specifically on handling inflation and cost of living adjustments in multi-year budgets. Ramping budgets show costs increasing over time as projects expand in scope or scale. This pattern fits projects with planned growth trajectories. Phased implementation often creates ramping budgets. A program might serve 100 participants in year 1, 200 in year 2, and 300 in year 3. As participant numbers grow, so do staffing, supplies, and support costs. The budget should reflect this planned expansion. Examples include pilot-to-scale programs that test approaches at small scale before broader implementation. Geographic expansion projects that add service sites over time naturally incur growing costs. Research studies that recruit participants in waves may have increasing data collection costs as cohorts accumulate. Planning for ramping budgets requires ensuring your funding structure supports the growth trajectory. If you will need significantly more resources in year 3 than year 1, confirm that your funder's annual funding allocations accommodate this pattern. Some grants provide equal annual installments, which may not align with ramping resource needs. Discuss budget patterns with your program officer if your project requires non-standard funding allocations. Some funders can accommodate front-loaded or back-loaded distributions if justified by project design. Many projects have a wind-down phase in their final year or months that should be reflected in budgeting. Understanding closeout considerations helps you plan final year resources appropriately. Project closeout activities occur in the final period. Data analysis is completed, final reports are prepared, equipment is inventoried, and administrative closeout occurs. Some projects reduce staffing in the final months as program activities conclude. Your budget should reflect any reduced activity levels in the final period. Dissemination focus often characterizes later project phases. Research projects may shift from data collection to analysis and publication. Program projects may emphasize documentation and sharing of lessons learned. Conference presentations, publication costs, and dissemination activities may be concentrated in later years. Transition and sustainability planning may be appropriate if project activities will continue beyond the grant. Budget for activities that prepare for continuation, such as developing sustainability plans, securing ongoing funding, or transitioning to organizational operations. These activities occur as the grant period concludes. No cost extension possibilities may affect your planning. If projects often need additional time to complete work, consider how your budget would adapt to extended timelines. Funds remaining at the original end date would need to support continued activities during the extension period. Aligning your budget with your project timeline requires systematic matching of activities to the resources they require. This alignment produces budgets that reflect project reality, map activities to years by identifying when major project activities occur, create a timeline showing phases, milestones, and key activities for each project year. This timeline becomes the foundation for budget allocation. When does data collection happen? When do interventions occur? When is analysis conducted? Resource requirements follow from activity mapping. For each activity, determine what resources it requires. Participant recruitment needs staff time, perhaps incentives, possibly advertising. Field data collection needs travel, equipment, supplies. Analysis needs computing resources and personnel time. Connect activities to their resource needs. Timing of purchases should place equipment and major purchases when they will actually be needed. If specialized equipment supports year 2 data collection, you might purchase it late in year 1 or early in year 2. If you need technology infrastructure before programming begins, budget it in the appropriate startup period. Staffing transitions account for hiring timelines, departures, and effort changes over the project. A position might be posted in month 1, filled in month 4, and fully productive by month 6. Later years might reduce certain positions as project phases conclude. Build realistic staffing timelines into your budget. Personnel costs typically dominate grant budgets, making thoughtful personnel forecasting essential for multi-year projects. Several factors affect how personnel costs change over time. Hiring timeline affects first-year personnel costs. If you will post a position at project start and realistically fill it in month 3 or 4, your first-year budget for that position should reflect 9 or 8 months rather than 12. Budgeting full-year salary when you will not have the person hired until spring leaves excess funds in year 1. Effort changes may occur as project phases shift. The project manager might be full-time during intensive implementation in year 2, but reduced to 75% effort in year 3 as activities wind down. Data collection staff might work only during collection periods. Reflect these effort variations in your budget. Salary increases should be built into multi-year personnel budgets. Most organizations provide annual merit increases. An employee starting at $50,000 might earn $51,500 in year 2 and $53,000 in year 3 with 3% annual increases. Using year 1 salary for all years produces underfunding. Turnover planning recognizes that staff may leave during multi-year projects. While you cannot predict specific departures, recognize that replacement hiring takes time and may result in salary savings during transitions. Some budgets build in modest contingency for turnover. Non-personnel costs also require thoughtful forecasting across project years. Different cost categories may have distinct timing patterns based on project design. Equipment timing often concentrates major purchases in specific years. Laboratory equipment, computing infrastructure, and specialized instruments are typically purchased once, usually early in the project. Ongoing equipment costs might include maintenance, repairs, or minor additions in later years, but not repeated major purchases. Travel patterns may vary based on project activities each year. Baseline travel for team meetings and conferences might remain constant. However, site visits might be more intensive during implementation years, while dissemination travel might increase in final years. Match travel budget to anticipated activities. Supply consumption aligns with activity intensity. Consumable supplies, participant materials, and operating supplies correlate with program activity levels. If you serve more participants in year 2, you need more supplies. If data collection is concentrated in year 3, laboratory consumables peak then. Connect supply budgets to activity levels. Contractual services should be matched to project needs. Evaluator contracts might run throughout the project or focus on specific assessment periods. Consultant engagements serve particular project phases. Sub-award amounts may vary as partner activities ramp up or down. Budget contractual services when the work will actually occur. How you present multi-year budgets affects reviewer understanding and confidence. Clear, consistent presentation demonstrates competent budget planning. Year-by-year format shows each project year's budget separately. Reviewers can see how costs are allocated across time. Most funders require this format, with separate columns or sections for each year. The format allows reviewers to track how specific items change from year to year. Summary totals provide the total budget across all years along with category totals. Reviewers want to see both annual breakdowns and cumulative amounts. Clear totals enable reviewers to understand total project cost while also examining annual patterns. Justification by year explains significant variations between years. If year 1 is 50% higher than year 2 because of equipment purchases, your justification should explain this. If year 3 includes heavy dissemination costs not present earlier, explain why. Year-specific explanations help reviewers understand the reasoning behind your budget pattern. Consistency checks ensure totals reconcile across different presentations of your budget. If your summary shows a total of $1.2 million, the individual year totals should sum to exactly that amount. If your SF424A shows different totals than your detailed budget, you have an error. Check all numbers for consistency before submission. Common forecasting mistakes undermine budget credibility and create implementation problems. Recognizing these errors helps you avoid them. Flat budgets showing identical amounts each year suggest lack of thought about project phases. Real projects rarely have exactly the same costs every year. Equipment purchases, activity cycles, and staffing patterns all create variation. Flat budgets tell reviewers you may not understand your own project well enough to forecast appropriately. Missing escalation fails to account for salary and price increases over time. Personnel costs rise annually due to merit increases and cost of living adjustments. Supplies and travel costs increase with inflation. A budget using year 1 costs for year 5 will be significantly underfunded unless it accounts for these increases. Hiring assumptions that positions will be filled immediately from day 1 are unrealistic. Recruitment takes time. Offers may not be immediately accepted. Start dates may be delayed. Budgeting 12 months of salary in year 1, when you will realistically hire in month 4, creates artificial surplus in year 1 and potential shortfall later. Activity misalignment means budget timing does not match activity timing. If your narrative describes equipment purchases in the setup phase, but your budget shows equipment in year 3, you have misalignment. Budget and narrative should tell the same story about when activities and expenditures occur. Multi-year forecasting involves inherent uncertainty. You cannot know exactly what costs will be 3 or 5 years in the future. Understanding how to handle this uncertainty helps you develop realistic budgets. Reasonable estimates based on best available information provide defensible projections. Research current costs, use established salary scales, consult with vendors about equipment pricing. Your estimates should reflect diligent effort to determine likely costs even when precision is impossible. Built-in flexibility recognizes that federal grants typically allow some rebudgeting between categories. If your year 3 supply costs turn out different than projected, you can often adjust by moving funds from other categories. This flexibility means minor forecasting errors can be corrected during implementation without major problems. Conservative assumptions recommend erring on the side of higher costs when uncertainty exists. If travel might cost $8,000 or $12,000 depending on factors you cannot predict, budgeting toward the higher end provides cushion. Underestimating creates problems, modest overestimation provides flexibility. Contingency discussion varies by funder. Federal regulations generally prohibit budgeting contingency reserves for unforeseen events. However, some funders allow explicit contingency amounts. Know your funder's policy. Even without explicit contingency, building reasonable estimates with conservative assumptions creates implicit cushion. Funder policies affect how multi-year budgets are managed. Understanding these policies helps you plan appropriately and avoid problems during implementation. Annual funding means some funders award multi-year grants 1 year at a time. You receive a multi-year commitment, but funding is released annually. Later year funds may depend on continued appropriations and satisfactory progress. This structure affects your planning and creates some uncertainty about future year funding. Non-competing continuations are how some agencies handle subsequent years of multi-year awards. You submit progress reports and updated budgets to receive each year's funding. While generally routine, these continuation processes require attention and continued strong performance. Understanding the continuation requirements helps you plan for them. Budget period flexibility varies by funder and award. Some grants allow significant movement of funds between years. Others restrict transfers. Knowing how much flexibility you have helps you make decisions about when to incur costs. When in doubt, ask your program officer about flexibility between budget periods. Carryover policies determine whether unspent funds from 1 year can transfer to the next. Some funders allow automatic carryover up to certain thresholds. Others require prior approval or prohibit carryover entirely. Understanding carryover rules helps you manage spending pace across years. Following best practices for multi-year budgeting produces stronger proposals and more successful project implementation. These practices should guide your approach to any multi-year grant. Start with timeline by developing your activity timeline before budgeting. Understand when major phases occur, when key activities happen, and how the project evolves over time. This timeline becomes the foundation for budget allocation across years. Match resources to activities by aligning costs with when work occurs. Equipment purchased in setup phases goes in early year budgets. Dissemination activities and final phases go in later year budgets. Travel for specific activities goes in the years those activities happen. Resources should follow activities. Build in escalation to account for salary and price increases over time. Use your organization's established rates for annual salary increases. Apply reasonable inflation factors to non-personnel costs. Multi-year budgets should increase modestly even if activity levels remain constant, reflecting cost increases over time. Explain variations by justifying year-to-year differences clearly in your budget narrative. Reviewers should understand why year 1 costs more or less than year 2. Unexplained variations raise questions. Clear explanations build confidence. Help reviewers follow your logic through explicit justification of budget patterns. Let us summarize the key points from this lesson on multi-year forecasting. Multi-year budgets should reflect project lifecycle phases rather than arbitrarily distributing costs equally across years. Different projects have different resource patterns over time. Your budget should tell the true story of how your project will unfold and what resources each phase requires. Different budget patterns serve different project types. Front-loaded budgets with heavy early investment work for projects with significant startup costs. Steady-state budgets fit ongoing operations with stable activity levels. Ramping budgets accommodate projects that expand over time. Match your budget pattern to your project's actual trajectory. Alignment between budget timing and activity timing is essential. Equipment purchases should appear in years when you will buy equipment. Staffing levels should reflect when positions are actually filled. Travel should correspond to when trips will occur. Misalignment between budget and activities suggests poor planning and creates implementation problems. In our next lesson, we focus specifically on inflation and cost of living adjustments. Prices rise over time, and multi-year budgets must account for these increases to avoid being underfunded in later years. We will explore techniques for building appropriate escalation into your budgets. Practice exercise. Sketch a multi-year budget outline for a 3-year project in your field. What pattern would it follow? Where would major costs be concentrated? How would costs change from year to year?